Welcome to What's Next. Very excited to have you here. Sarah was telling me backstage, we were talking about just what an amazing morning it is in DC. For those of you around the world on live stream, just want to make you jealous for a second. Amazing views of the cherry blossoms as we all drove in this morning. So excited for the lineup today, and we could barely have imagined it. Just 6 years ago, when 3 people, then 6 people, Nick Johnston with his famous blank whiteboard came up with Axios, and Axios, which means worthy in Greek, became What's Next. So we appreciate your being here. And today at the second annual Axios What's Next Summit, we're excited to, in the Axios spirit, make you smarter, faster. Our leadoff guest has led one of the great American lives. He was a Navy combat pilot. He was an astronaut with NASA, lived on the International Space Station, a New York Times bestselling author. Please welcome to the Axios stage, from the great state of Arizona, Senator Mark Kelly. Senator Kelly, welcome to Axios.
Thank you very much.
So today is all about what's next, but before we plunge into that, I have to ask you about your Carolina blue tie.
My Carolina blue tie, this is the original in aviation, the Wright Flyer. I don't think it came from the plans, but it came afterwards. 120 years later, we've done a lot in aviation and in space.
So that's how we got here. So, Senator, you're a Jersey boy. As a Navy combat pilot, you served in Operation Desert Storm, 4 missions into space, and you're the wife of former Congresswoman.
I'm the husband of former.
Fact checker.
Now, sometimes people will call me Mr. Giffords.
Fair enough. And now you're senator in the seat once held by the great John McCain. You're on the Armed Services, Energy, Environment committees, and you just won re-election. Senator, congratulations.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you very much.
So, Axios always starts with the news, and you just signed on to the bill that Senator Mark Warner, I'm a constituent across the river in Virginia. He's chairman of the Senate Intelligence Committee. He has a TikTok bill. Tell us what it would do and why it matters.
Well, let me start by saying, we're concerned that this platform that is used by well over 100 million Americans now has not a lot of safeguards with regards to our own national security. First of all, the Chinese government on demand can get access to the data of millions, of Americans just by asking. So on top of that, we also have, the issue that they can, very quickly communicate, if they chose to do this, with millions of Americans and try to potentially change a narrative. That's a national security issue, for us. So, what we want to do, and CFIUS that controls, foreign businesses within the United States even said that, this should be sold to a U.S. company. So that's what we would like to see.
Look at the flip side of that, Senator. TikTok, of course, pervasive in the culture, the youth vote important to Democrats. How worried are you that young Americans will see you as out of touch or trying to take away something that is part of their daily lives?
Well, my daughter might. My younger daughter, Claire, she asks me about this frequently. She's in her 20s. And she, let me be fair, she recognizes that this platform is, in her role, in the business that she works in, it's a very valuable tool.
And so she's a super user.
A credible marketing tool, right? We get that. So, there are some things that we can do to still allow this capability for U.S. businesses and for individuals to use as social media, and at the same time protect the national security of the United States. And, one obvious thing is, a big chunk of this company is owned by a Chinese company that's very close to the Chinese government. That can change.
And so the bottom line, and you're a former business person in the space exploration business, what do you think that ultimately is going to happen with TikTok? It sounds like you think there's ultimately going to be an accommodation.
I'm not that great at predicting the future. And Washington is a complicated place, especially with regards to legislation. But I will say when it has to do with national security, issues like this, Democrats and Republicans, come together to protect the national security of the United States. So I think eventually we will come to some sort of resolution.
And your daughter will probably still have TikTok.
And she might be mad at me, but she will probably still have TikTok.
Okay. Senator, you're very concerned about competitiveness of the United States, places that the U.S. has fallen behind China, and you were one of the people behind the CHIPS and Science Act, which encouraged microchip manufacturing here in the United States. In December, President Biden was in Arizona, one of the biggest, most important chip plants in the United States being built in Arizona. How much is the chip belt changing? How do we get back on the horse?
Well, so we invented the semiconductor chip in this country, and we used to make the best chips. And we used to, not too long ago, make about 40% of the supply of semiconductor chips in the world. That is now down to 12%. And it had been going in the wrong direction. And this also is a national security issue for us because the best semiconductor chips in the world come from across the Pacific Ocean, mostly Taiwan, South Korea. The chips in Taiwan from the Taiwan Semiconductor Manufacturing Company, TSMC, are the best chips in the world. They go in everything that has an on-off switch, cars, your cell phone, weapon systems. If we lose access to those chips, in a matter of a couple years, we could lose a significant portion of our GDP. We also need these chips, to defend ourselves. And so this became an untenable situation. So we had to fix it. So I was one of the authors of this legislation, the CHIPS and Science Act, that is providing about $52 billion. $39 billion of it is in incentives, but there's also, education, research and development, building a network to design the next generation of chips. We're going to bring this capability to the United States. It's already happening.
Senator, I don't know if I'm allowed to say a bad word from the Axios stage, but this was a bipartisan bill. What did you learn from how you got that passed?
Nothing is easy, especially in the United States Senate. This isn't like my, former career, as an astronaut. If the United States Senate had the same, if NASA had the same rules as the United States Senate, the rocket ship would never leave the launch pad. I mean, that's, pretty clear. So it's challenging, but, we work together across the aisle to do some hard things, and, things like CHIPS and the Science Act, it got a little dicey there at the end, and we were even concerned that it might not pass the House. But in the end, the United States Congress did the right thing.
And it can be done, and I'm not sure that everybody who's watching knows that.
It's done a lot. The bipartisan infrastructure bill is another, good example of us working together to do really positive things for the country.
For our in-person guests out in the lobby, as you walk in, the incredible Axios events team has set up an interactive version of the battery belt, which the Axios visuals team created. It turns out the battery belt in the United States, manufacturing batteries for cars, was basically the country. Same thing with chips, right? The quote chip belt goes from upstate New York to Phoenix, right? Like, how important will it be to rising centers of influence to the economy outside the coast?
Well, it's going to be important for the economy of the country, but also in states like Arizona, Texas, New York that have these manufacturing facilities, these factories. It means tens of thousands of high-paying jobs that you can actually raise a family on that do not require a 4-year degree. We need more of that. And it's not just chips. I mean, we've got other issues where manufacturing has moved, to China, to other countries that we'll have an opportunity to bring back. Higher fuel costs. If we're buying stuff from across the ocean, it raises the price. Rising wages in other countries. It's starting to become more competitive to manufacture certain things here. but it's also a really positive thing for all of us. So, I mean, we're starting to look at, other issues. I was meeting with a company just recently talking about display technology, displays that go in fighter jets, your phone, TVs, right, anywhere. I mean, this, even like possibly this screen, this is probably a projector, but, the clock up there, right? So this stuff is all made overseas. Similar issue that we cannot lose access to this technology. It would make more sense to start manufacturing it again in the United States.
How excited, optimistic are you that chips are going to fuel a rise in the importance of Phoenix and upstate New York and other places that got less attention when all the attention was on the Bay Area, New York, DC?
Well, it's a big deal for Arizona and Texas and New York. Idaho has a big memory manufacturing site there. And this is just going to help us grow and bring other companies to the state of Arizona. The suppliers for the chip manufacturers like TSMC and Intel that are expanding their facilities. TSMC's investment in the state of Arizona, it was, if you checked last year, it was $13 billion. Now it's $40 billion. They're planning to expand further. Similar story with Intel.
So it sounds like the Chips and Science Act, a little bit like NASA, in that the spending, the jobs are spread around across the country.
Well, yeah, that's not, these aren't really government contracts, right? These are private companies that are making decisions to base their operations and to do their manufacturing in certain places. But I guess it is similar that it's somewhat, spread out.
The ultimate what's next, space. So you met my friend Travis Schenck, who's here, who has 3 kids. What is the likelihood that his kids will see a human on Mars?
I think it's pretty likely. I'm still hopeful that I will see somebody walk on Mars.
You just turned 59?
I turned 59. I think we could do it in, 20 years is not out of the question. A lot depends on the U.S. government, what we decide to focus on, how the Artemis missions to the moon go.
And that's going to put humans back for the first time since the Apollo program.
Yeah, so next year, the end of next year, we hope to send people around the moon, 2025 down to the surface. So Americans back on the surface of the moon. We're also doing this with our international partners that we've traditionally worked with on the International Space Station. I've been to the space station 4 different times. On every flight, I was with folks from other countries. So this was a partnership, and generally the partnership has worked well. We've got some challenges right now on the space station in that program with Russia and the decisions they've made with their illegal war in Ukraine. That's a challenge. But as we go forward here, my expectation is that when we go to Mars someday, we'll do this as international collaboration.
I mentioned you're on the Armed Services Committee. How concerned are you about the national security dimensions of this new space race?
I'm concerned about it. I mean, it's, China has a space station in orbit. They're putting a lot more satellites, ISR satellites, which are like intelligence, surveillance, reconnaissance platforms in low Earth orbit. They've got a lot of them. Space is becoming the high ground, in a military operation. Even if you go back to like the Revolutionary War, maintaining the high ground in combat operations is a significant thing. I would say now the high ground could be considered space, and having that ISR capability. We also use it for other things, and we've got to make sure that we are more capable than the Chinese. If we don't, that's a national security risk for us.
And the dangers even include like our GPS, right? The satellites that.
Yeah, I mean, we're concerned with a scenario that we would lose access to GPS. I mean, we have weapons, a number of them that guide based on the GPS signal. Airplanes use GPS. Some of our most sophisticated fighters gets a lot harder if you don't have GPS available. We would expect our adversaries might go after, that system in the, first days of a conflict. So we've got to be prepared for things like this. Right now we are making some tough decisions, on the Armed Services Committee about what we're going to fund. what new weapons, weapon systems, aircraft, how are we going to upgrade our military to meet this, challenge of this century? And the challenge and the near-peer adversary that we're dealing with is China.
A hard question. How much mindshare resources do you feel like China is devoting to defense and space versus the U.S.?
A lot. And
More?
probably, well, I would say they're devoting about 10 times more than they did 20 years ago. Their defense budget has increased rapidly.
And do we need to be doing more?
I feel that we need to be making the right choices. We can't do everything. I think it's
And so what
fair
would be
to
at the top of your
recognize that
list?
we operate with limited resources. I mean, every country does.
So
Every
what would you
business does.
prioritize, Senator?
Well, I'd prioritize, areas where over the last 20 years, as we have spent 20 years doing counterterrorism and counterinsurgency in the Middle East, we've fallen behind in some areas. And not necessarily behind the Chinese, but they've been allowed to catch up. AI is an example. Also, hypersonic missile systems. They've got some, we have intelligence that, they've got some pretty capable systems. And we need to do better in certain areas.
Last question, Senator. What should the U.S. AI priority be? And are you concerned that we're not as competitive there as we should be?
Well, I think on some things, I met with, Sam Altman recently, the CEO of OpenAI, has the ChatGPT software. He feels that, his software is a couple years ahead of where something similar commercial capability that China has. But they're investing a lot of money in it, and artificial intelligence is going to be used by militaries to make decisions. It can make decisions quicker. In some cases, it might make smarter decisions.
So it's the next weapon.
Well, I wouldn't say it's a weapon. I would say it's a tool that warfighters can use, to position forces, to make decisions on which weapon systems to use. And then we've got to make decisions ourselves on, how much control do we want to give an AI program over, certain capabilities that our military has. And these will be debates that we'll be having here in Washington and in other capitals around the country around the world with our allies. We've got a lot of work ahead of us.
Senator, we always end with one fun thing. You have a great quality that you share with Axios CEO Jim VandeHei, and that is you are an on-time guy. How do you do that, and how did it become a thing for you?
When I was the commander of the space shuttle a couple times, I used to tell my crew members, if you're not early, you're late. Like showing up on time that doesn't work. You got to be a minute early. And I think as far as U.S. senators go, I'm probably one of the few that actually likes to show up on time. I hear this a lot, like, hey, you're always here on time. We only have so much. I also don't like to waste other people's time. And that's why I like to show up when right before the thing is supposed to start.
Senator Mark Kelly, thanks for being our leadoff speaker on time. He was backstage early. Thank you, Senator Kelly.
Thank you, Mike. Thank you.
Yeah.